Blackwater Ben by William Durbin. Chapter 15. Charlie's Story, or Punting on the Cherwell. One Sunday morning, Ben sat down the breakfast tray and looked at Charlie. "Are you waiting for something?" Charlie asked. "Ain't you gonna finish that story about you waiting at the train station in Grand Rapids? Don't you have to run back to the cook shack?" "I'm not so rushed since Never's hired on." "Let me see," Charlie set his glasses on the table. "I believe I told you about arriving in Grand Rapids, and that's where you left off. On that particular day, I was set on getting as far away from the civilized world as I could. That's why I'd bought a ticket to Pembina. And you said your problems were all due to a girl. But it wasn't that one." Ben pointed to a photo by the bookcase. "You are a astute listener," Charlie grinned. "The girl I refer to was the daughter of a mathematics professor. Back in Oxford, I'd worked my way through school by singing in the choir and studying hard. You can't imagine how dull it is to spend your whole life translating old poems from Latin to English. But I had done my A-level exams and won a scholarship to college. That's when the new professor arrived." "I've read a few dull poems myself," Ben said. "Did that professor by any chance have a pretty daughter?" "You guessed it. I fell for her hard. But her father's was a mean bloke who despised commoners. He had hopes of his daughter marrying a titled man. But she and I saw each other in secret. One day I took her punting on the river Cherwell." "What's punting?" Ben asked. "A punt's a flat-bottomed boat that you pole along. If you pack a basket lunch, it makes a romantic afternoon. Her father happened to walk across the bridge as we were returning to the boatworks. He took a swing at me with an umbrella and slipped on the wet planking. I reached out to catch him, but we both tumbled into the river. That was the end of my Oxford career. A month later, the girl announced her engagement to a nobleman from Kent. I packed up my books and headed for America." "But how does that other gal figure in?" Ben asked. "Remember how I told you I was killing time at the station in Grand Rapids?" Ben nodded. "The train finally pulled in, and I climbed on board. But I had no sooner handed the conductor my ticket when I saw a pretty girl out of the corner of my eye. Something clicked inside me. I hollered, 'Hold the train!' and I got right off." "Well, she must have been real pretty," Ben said. "The truth is I only had one glance, yet I sensed she was something special. I introduced myself to her father and asked permission to speak with her. Her name was Lucinda Warren. She had just been hired as the teacher in Blackwater. 'Why, isn't that a coincidence?' I said to her. 'I'm traveling to Blackwater, too.' At the time, I had no clue where Blackwater was, but I would have bought a ticket to China if she'd been heading there." A strange thought struck Ben's head. Did anyone call her Lucy? "Some folks did. Is something wrong?" Ben stood up and walked closer to the picture. "Did she always wear that necklace?" "It was her favorite." Ben thought back to the wedding picture on the wall back home. "And she was hired to teach at Blackwater?" "What are you driving at?" "My mother wore a necklace just like that," Ben said slowly. "And before she got married, she was a teacher." Charlie's eyes widened. "I've never heard anyone call my mother anything but Lucy." "Blimey O'Reilly." Charlie's mouth dropped open, and his glasses nearly fell off the end of his nose. "Don't tell me your mum was Lucinda Warren." "And you were her beau," Ben gaped at Charlie. It was even harder to imagine the filer going courting than it was to see him as a choir boy. Ben took a breath to steady himself. "Can you tell me what my mother was like? She died when I was really little." "Died? Lucinda's gone?" Charlie stared at Ben. He turned away. When he finally looked up, he spoke slowly. "Of course, I heard that your pa was a widower, but I had no idea that—" He sighed. "And you sitting here and being her boy all along, it's too much to swallow at once." Charlie and Ben both fixed their eyes on the photograph for a long time. "When did you start courting her?" Ben asked. "I tried to win her hand from the first moment that I saw her. But your pa was the lucky man she married." Charlie stopped again. "The whole thing flabbergasts me." "What sort of lady was she?" Ben asked. "Like I said before, she was real pretty, but she had more than good looks. You could call it grace or style." Charlie waved toward the bookshelf. "A poem in one of my books comes closest to telling what she was like. It's called She Walks in Beauty. Lucinda had a light in her eyes that could lift you off your feet. Whatever happened between the two of you?" Ben! It was Pa yelling. Sorry. Ben opened the door. But I gotta go, Charlie nodded. Ben ran back to the cook shack. Pa, you'll never guess what Charlie told me. Who cares what that cranky old dentist said? We ain't got time for guessing games around here, unless you plan on driving an empty swing dingle out to the cut and letting those loggers have lunch on you. Fine, Ben thought. This can stay between me and Charlie. The next day, Ben was so anxious to hear that Charlie finished his story that he brought the man's lunch over half-hour early. Charlie began where he had left off. I had big hopes for me and Lucinda, but her father took me more than she did. Her pa was so pleased to hear that I was going to Blackwater that he asked if I would look after his daughter. It was a big improvement over that blighter in Oxford knocking me into the river Cherwell. So you went to Blackwater? That very day, Charlie said. Just then, Nevers tapped on the door. Your pa asked me to get old Dan, so you better hurry up. I need to get cracking on these saws anyway, Charlie said. Promise you finished telling the story? Of course. When Ben got back to the cook shack, Pa was talking to Nevers. You do any teamstering in Carolina? I've done some plowing, Nevers said, but we favor smaller animals. Lots of farmers get by with a pair of mules. Mules are smart, Pa said, but they would never move a tonnage of wood we need. Some camps use oxen, but that old saying, dumb as an ox, is true. Only advantage to an ox is it makes decent soup if it dies on the job. Nevers was still laughing at Pa's joke when Ben walked in. Remember that blind mule Remember the blind mule Montgomery owned? Ben asked, trying to keep Pa in his good mood. He could plow all day and night, but Maggie went and sold him because he kicked her cat in the head. But Pa only said, we better quit gabbing about livestock and get back to work here.